In our last video, we finished the 900 block of 6th Street, and before we go on to the 1000 block, I just want to peek around the corner at Troy Laundry. Troy Laundry is the oldest continuing laundry in the city of Port Huron, and probably the oldest continuing business in Port Huron. According to this advertisement that was put into the booklet of Greetings from Porcher in 1897, it says this about the laundry. Troy Steam Laundry, F.C. Parsons, proprietor, was established in 1878, and some of the cleanest and noblest work to be found in the state comes from this laundry. They also manufacture custom shirts and ladies' shirtwaists. They also employ 35 experts and have all the latest and most modern machinery. Mr. Parsons was born in Michigan in 1858 and was a conscientious member of the Board of Education 2 terms. This is undoubtedly the laundry of the city, and they do much contract work. This wasn't the first location for Troy Laundry, though. It was established on the west side of Huron Avenue between Butler and Quay Street, or Grand River and Quay now. It was the only laundry in the city. It'd be interesting to know how the people accepted a laundry and how soon they patronized it. At first, shirts and collars were sent to Troy, New York, hence the name Troy Laundry. As you can see in this ad here, they later moved their business over to Butler Street, which is now Grand River. The ad says this: Troy Laundry, Butler Street, F.C. Parsons, proprietor. To the ladies, winter is approaching, and new is the time to get your quilts, blankets, and other heavy clothing mangled. That cracks me up. Sounds pretty funny today, your clothes being mangled. But that's what they were back in those days. When I was growing up, we had a mango, which is a big machine with a heated roller that pressed your clothes. However, I digress. It goes on to say this: old blankets will look as good as new ones. Send in your lace curtains and have the summer stains removed. I am still making a specialty of family washing. And then it says sewer pipe. I hope that's not part of that ad. Troy Laundry then moved from their Butler Street location over to the corner of Pine and 6th Street. And in this photograph here, it shows a very early photograph of Troy Laundry. I like this photograph. I think there's 2 or 3 things here that we can look at as we zoom in that you might enjoy, at least I enjoy looking at them. The first thing I like to look at is the signage on the side of the building where it says Troy Steam Laundry, and then below that I believe it says Super Soft Water, and I can't quite make out the rest. The next thing I'd like to look at is we drop down here and we see this vertical signage. It says F.C. Parsons, who was actually the owner of the building. In fact, his very first laundry was called Parsons Laundry. Then, of course, there's the horse and buggies that are out front of the laundry. Not 1, not 2, but 3. And with the last being, of course, a delivery wagon for Troy Laundry. And over the decades that they were in business, the form of the delivery system changed. Here we see the horse and buggy. But later on, we saw the actual trucks, or the early trucks that came out in the United States, Port Huron specifically. Unfortunately, we have a photograph of those early trucks. As we zoom here, we can see the type of trucks they were. Can't really make them out real clear, but in this next photo you can, thanks to T.J. Gaffney. This photograph was in his book. This was one of the many interesting photographs that Mr. Gaffney has in his book entitled Port Huron, 1880 to 1960 Postcard History Series. Years later, the truck would look like this. Marcia Mullane shared this photograph, and she said that if you put this sign in the window, Troy cleaners would stop and pick up your laundry. And they had a regular route, and in her neighborhood, it was Ed Peeling, who you can see the name on the sign, and also the days that they would pick up in her neighborhood, which was Mondays and Thursdays. Years later, you can see the exterior of the building has changed somewhat. The bricks have now been painted, and the signage on the side is no longer there. And also, there's signage hanging from the front of the building that wasn't there originally as well. You can see the side of the Troy Laundry building there on the left. This is looking straight down the alley, or the custom alley as it was called, north, and you can see all the way to Water Street, and that large building across from the post office is the White Building. I thought I'd throw this photo in at no extra charge. This was from Edison's Golden Jubilee parade that they had in Porcher, and for that, of course, this was sponsored. This one was sponsored by the Troy Laundry Company. I'm not sure what all this represents. It looks like a bunch of black and white cows exploding out of the float, but I think it's something much more sophisticated than that. I just don't know what. And in this photo, taken years later, it looked like Troy Laundry expanded all the way to where the old Goodyear store used to be. And like I said earlier, Troy Laundry is still in Port Huron today. They have two locations, one on Garfield Street and one on Pine Grove Avenue. Quite a legacy for this little laundry that started out on Huron Avenue. All right, on to the 1000 block of 6th Street. And as we look down in this block, we can see what there is to see, which basically currently is nothing except parking lots. Although there is something on the other end of the street that we'll get to in a few moments. At one time, this was a very nice residential area and had some very nice homes on this street as well, and a couple businesses. The first business we want to look at was on this corner right here, which would be the southwest corner of 6th and Pine. And today, of course, it's a parking lot. But when I was growing up, on this corner was the Albert Fogg and Son Funeral Home. Do you remember this photograph that we looked at in our last video? This was the Goodyear dealership on the northeast corner of 6th and Pine. Well, right kitty corner from that, as we just zoom in here on this corner, we can see the Albert Fogg Funeral Home. The Fogg Funeral Home was founded by Albert Fogg in 1904. He started working for George Thompson, who was the undertaker that we looked at in our last video. That was down there right next to the Herald newspaper building. And that was about 1890. He wasn't even 20 years old when he started there yet. Mr. Fogg purchased the Mumford Undertaking establishment in 1904, and in 1916 he moved to Military Street, where he remained until he purchased the Colonial Inn on the corner we've been looking at, the southwest corner of 6th and Pine. This was remodeled into the first funeral home type building in Port Huron in 1924. Mr. Fogg purchased the 1903 horse-drawn Studebaker hearse soon after he acquired Mumford's. And at one time, this was at the Goodall's Farm Museum. I don't know if it still is or not, but at one time it was. And this photograph you're looking at isn't the exact hearse that Mr. Fogg had, but it would have been very similar to this one. If you recall, the Fogg's Undertaker establishment was on Military Street when the Omar Conger blew up, and the debris went a long ways. It went all the way from Black River to about the middle of the 900 block on the west side of Military Street. One of those pieces of debris was a 200-pound radiator that was hurled as far as Fogg's, crashing through the rear wall and the window, where some persons were severely injured by flying glass and chunks of wood. Others were trampled on in a panic. At the time, there was a funeral in progress, and there was about 150 mourners present. In 1924, his son Irvin joined him in the business, and after Albert Fogg died, he took over control of the funeral home. And at the time, it was the oldest funeral home in Port Huron to have been continued in one family. Unfortunately, Fogg's funeral home is no more, and the beautiful building came down in 1977. As we continue going down 6th Street, there's not much there to look at. And of course, in the past, since it was all residential, there's not much to look at there either. But there on the corner of Wall and 6th Street, there's a couple of things we want to look at. This is looking down 6th Street from the opposite direction on the corner of Wall and 6th. And on the left, you can see Our Savior Lutheran Church. And on the right is the American Legion Hall. Let's look at the northeast corner first, where the American Legion is, and see what was torn down so that the building could be built there. It was a beautiful home owned by John Johnston. This was back all the way into the 1800s, about 1871. Mr. Johnston was the owner of a private bank that was located on Military Street near the Black River. He was partners in that business with Fred Wells and H.G. Barnum. Decades later, the house would be owned and occupied by Robert Reed and his family. It was occupied by them until it was torn down to make way for the American Legion Hall. There were many homes that were torn down in the 1000 block of 6th Street. I know parking lots are important, but it just seems a waste. In this collage of homes taken about 1890, as we zoom in here, you can see that one of the streets featured is 6th Street, and it gives you an idea what that block would have looked like back then. Okay, let's walk across the street to the northwest corner of 6th Street and Wall Street, and here we find the Our Savior Lutheran Church. But when I was growing up, I knew it as the English Lutheran Church. I remember thinking as a boy, of course it's an English Lutheran Church. We're in America, for goodness sakes. Why wouldn't it be English? But come to find out, there was a very healthy contingent of German immigrants that came into Porcher and formed their own church, which was originally named the German Evangelical Lutheran Society. This was about 1871, and this would later become the Trinity Lutheran Church. A group of parishioners from the Trinity Lutheran Church, or back then it was the German Lutheran Church, wanted to separate themselves from that German heritage. I assume they spoke German in their service, and they left the church to form their own church. The church had its first service in the Porcher Library at 6th and Wall Street. A month later, the congregation voted to change the name to the English Lutheran Church of Our Savior. Within 2 years, the congregation was able to purchase a large home on the northwest corner of 6th and Wall, which they converted into a church and parsonage. 4 years later, they purchased property adjoining the church. By 1932, the congregation was ready to lay the cornerstone for its new church building. The $30,000 church was dedicated in February of 1933, nearly 15 years to the date that the congregation first met. We have a drawing of the home that was there before the church was built, and you can see it right here. And if you look in the background, that would be 7th Street actually behind the house. And that would be the old Congregational Church that's set on the corner of 7th and Wall. I found this picture in the book, Porcher Celebrating Our Past. This is a large book that would look perfect on your coffee table and has many wonderful pictures and a lot of useful historical information in the book, and covers the years 1857 to 2007. We have a little extra time, so I'll tell you my connection to this church that goes all the way back to the 1950s, early 1950s. My story starts with these cute little kids right here. That's my Aunt Joanne. She's 5 years older than I am. And of course, the little boy is me. My mother and my Aunt Joanne were sisters, and their parents were invalids, so my mom took care of them. And of course, we all lived in the same house. So my mom and dad were second parents to her, and she was more like my sister than my aunt. And we were pretty close together in age, so we did a lot of things together, including going to the beach. By the way, those are my legs. So what's all this have to do with the church? Well, really nothing, but it does make for a more interesting story. Anyway, my aunt had a crush on this young fella that went to this church. His name was Bill Green. And of course, she wanted me to go with her. She didn't want to go alone. And so we went together to this church. And the crush developed into romance, and this photograph was taken at Bill's senior prom. And it wasn't long before my dad was walking her down the aisle to this church. And this handsome young fellow sitting at the end of the pew with a bow tie is me. This wedding almost didn't happen that evening because Reverend Ruff, who was going to perform the ceremony, was in Detroit. And a snowstorm developed that night. And so he ended up having a police escort so he could get to the church on time. But everything turned out all right. All right, let's fast forward 50 years, and here we see the same couple renewing their vows at the same church. I'm sure there's many wonderful stories that could be told about the families that go to this church, and this one was only one of them. Join me in my next video, and we'll mosey on into the next block and look at the Porcher Museum and what was there before it was a museum.